100 senators took an oath on January 16th, promising to, quote, do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws. But 51 of those senators rejected witness testimony, which could have included some answers from people like the president's former national security advisor, John Bolton. A new report from the New York Times says Bolton's book manuscript details the president's efforts to direct him to help prompt a Ukrainian investigation into the Bidens. While 51 Republicans voted against witnesses, some of them admit that House managers actually proved their case against the president. One of those people is Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Even after voting no on witnesses, he said, quote, just because actions meet a standard of impeachment does not mean it is in the best interests of the country to remove a president from office. Joining me now is Jeffrey Rosen, the president and CEO of the National Constitution Center and a professor of law at the George Washington University Law School, and Joyce Vance, a former U.S. attorney, professor at the University of Alabama Law School and an MSNBC contributor. Welcome to both of you. Jeff, let me start with you because you have written so many books about courts and legal issues in America. And I think what America has had as a lesson in the last few weeks is that impeachment doesn't work like a trial. And I think we saw that on display in the last few days.
We did. And if you look at history, you're right, Ali, that impeachment has become so much more polarized than it used to be. In the Johnson impeachment, 7 Republican senators joined Democrats in voting to acquit because they thought that the evidence hadn't been fairly presented. In the Clinton impeachment, 5 Republicans joined the 45 Democrats to acquit on one charge and 10 on the other because they thought the case hadn't been proved. Here we're likely to see more or less a party line vote, maybe 1 or 2 defections, and that just suggests that the founders hope that in impeachment the senators would rise above their partisan interests and converge around the public interest. Is no longer the case.
Joyce, you were on with Ari Melber and when he was having a conversation with Alan Dershowitz. I want to just play a little bit of that and get your comment on it.
They impeached him for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Had they impeached him for bribery, the issue would be very, very different. Had they impeached him for extortion, the issue would be very different.
So if they use those words, you'd be fine with it?
To impeach him for bribery or to impeach him for extortion. Instead, they impeached him for abuse of power.
Is this a drafting issue then? You'd be fine with it if they just used the B word?
No, it's not a drafting issue because they had Professor Tribe on their side. They had a lot of zealots on their side. If they had the evidence, they would have been obviously smart enough to allege bribery or extortion or any of these other things. They didn't have the evidence. They didn't have the votes on that.
What's he talking about?
Yes, so this is, I think, a hyper-technical legal issue, but it's worth unpacking a little bit. The Democrats were going to lose in Professor Dershowitz's assessment, no matter how they handled this. The articles of impeachment, there are 2 of them. One is for abuse of presidential power, in essence. The other is for obstruction. Inside of the abuse of power article are allegations. It looks a lot like a criminal indictment, and it talks about crimes that, in essence, are bribery. But it's labeled with this abuse, sort of a moniker. And we heard Adam Schiff explain that he did that because that was the top-level crime, right? That was what they were looking at, high crimes and misdemeanors. Had the Democrats gone ahead and alleged bribery, I think we would now be having hyper-technical legal arguments about what bribery means in America in 2020. And there are some very distinct requirements that may or may not be met here. But the reality is that the sort of bribery that we're looking at for impeachment purposes is bribery as the founding fathers understood it in the late 1700s, where we didn't have a codified criminal code with elements prosecutors had to prove. Does the president's conduct rise to the level of bribery? Well, let's just look at it. He told the Ukrainian president, if you want money, if you want a visit, you're going to have to do me a favor. It's bribery in substance, and impeachment should be about substance.
Jeff, there were a few arguments going back and forth with the president's team. One is the one that Professor Dershowitz put forward and said that these actions by the president are not impeachable. Then you had Lamar Alexander and Marco Rubio saying maybe they were bad, but they weren't impeachable. And then there were other arguments put forward that the president is not subject to things that others would be subject to. It seemed to me to be an inconsistent approach. How did you review it?
It was very much arguing in the alternative, as the lawyers say. But you're right that what will the precedent of this acquittal be? For Johnson and Clinton, historians celebrated the fact that the allegation of a low-level crime was not enough to justify removal from office. Now the standard seems to be that you do need some allegation of a technical crime in order to justify removal, but we know from the other precedents that's not enough. And then we hear statements like Marco Rubio saying this is very serious, he did do it, but it doesn't meet the standard. So the fear of the Democrats, of course, is that all the constraints are off, that without a very, very serious technical crime, there's no possibility of removal. Republicans counter that if this president were removed for this, then any president could be removed for political offenses. But I think it's fair to say that after this impeachment, it'll be an extremely hard thing to remove any future president from office. So we may see lots of impeachments by the House if they're controlled by the opposite party, and lots of acquittals by the Senate. And the founders hoped that impeachment would be a bipartisan tool. Does not seem to be materializing.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.